This is an interview with Cary Lattin of the Gaines Basin Road near Albion, New York, conducted by Helen McAllister of Medina. Cary is a lifetime farmer and former county historian of Orleans County, a marvelous storyteller and a wonderful, warm person. Cary, would you please tell us where and when you were born?
I was born the 11th of June, 1898, on the Gaines Basin Road in the little old house on the North Farm. My father was born in that same house. And it's been in the Lattin family since the 1860s, and prior to that it was in the Anderson family, who was my ancestors, back as far as 1819. And Bill Lattin lives in the little old house at the present time.
And that's your son, Bill?
That's Bill Lattin, our son.
Okay. Would you please tell us the name of your father and your mother's maiden name?
My father's name was Nahum Anderson Lattin.
Nahum?
Nahum, N-A-H-U-M. And he was born in 1865.
All right.
And my mother's name was Sophia Elizabeth Harling.
H-A-R-L-I-N-G?
That's right, and she was born in 1872.
Did you have sisters and brothers?
I was the only son.
Only child?
That's right.
Okay. So you really grew up right here?
On these two farms.
Good heavens.
My father and mother went to housekeeping in the little old house where Bill lives in 1894. They were married in January, and my mother told me that when they clapboarded that house in January, it was warm and balmy, and the flies was crawling out of the lawn on the grass. It was so warm and balmy in 1894. And they lived there from 1894 until 1901. After my grandfather died, they came up here and took over at the stone house. So all my life I've lived on this farm.
And what do you call the stone house?
This cobblestone house that we're in today.
Your own home here,
That's
I see.
our home.
I see. When you were a small child, do you remember when you first went to school? Where did you go to school?
I went to Gaines Basin School up the road. It's about a half a mile up to the old cobblestone schoolhouse. And the first teacher I had was Mame Morrissey. I went there probably 2 or 3 weeks, the tail end of 1904. And I stuck my tongue out her one day in school, and she sent a boy out to get a switch, and he come in with a switch as big as a broom handle. I was scared when I saw that goddamn club.
Did she whip you with it?
No, she didn't. She sat up in the window, but I learned my lesson fast.
That was a one-room schoolhouse?
It was a one-room schoolhouse.
Up to grades 8, maybe?
About grade 8.
One teacher?
One teacher. And I went there for 5 grades. And after I got into 6th grade, I went to Albion Central School, walked to school.
You walked?
Walked to
from
school.
Here to school? In Albion?
In the wintertime, somebody else was going to school and I'd ride with them. But in the summertime, I walked and I rode a bicycle. But lots of times I'd walk cross lots because it was a lot shorter.
Yes. Yeah. What, well, going back to those school days, did you always take your own lunch?
Oh, sure. In the wintertime, I carried my lunch to school. In the summertime, I'd jog home at noon to get my lunch to home. And I was one of the first ones that took milk to school. I liked milk. I drank more milk than anybody alive in Orleans County.
How'd you keep it cold?
My mother put it in a mayonnaise jar. It held about a pint of milk, and I had a pint of milk. I carried this pint of milk to Gaines Basin School. I like milk, and the other kids ridiculed me, laughed, called me calf, and all that kind of stuff. I liked the milk, and I enjoyed it, and they would too. But they didn't want to do it to be fooled or kidded about, you know. But I like milk. I was one of the first ones to drink milk in school, and that's over 70 years ago. A little screw top bottle. It came in a mayonnaise jar called Gauntlet. It held about a pint.
Gauntlet?
Gauntlet mayonnaise. It had a screw top. See, it wouldn't leak out to get away from it. It had a screw top. That was unheard of. Screw top bottles in those days.
Oh, Cary, you still have your own teeth, so I guess the milk must have
that's right.
done you some good. So you went into Albion school then?
In the 6th grade in 1910.
Mm-hmm.
Went in 6th grade in 1910.
Mm-hmm. Then, was that did you stop school at the 6th grade or what?
No, I finished high school.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the boys and girls that was in the 6th grade, we continued on right through 6th, 7th, 8th, and into high school and graduated together. There was 4 or 5 of us that was in the 6th grade and graduated in 1917.
What did you do directly after high school? Did you go on to
I
school?
intended to go to Mechanics Institute. I wanted to be a draftsman, and I went down there to see about getting registered. And
Where was that, Cary?
in Rochester. It
Uh-huh.
was the forerunner of RIT.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came back, the hired man had gone, and Dad wasn't too healthy, and my mom said, "Why don't you stay and help Dad on the farm a year and go to school next year?" And so I've been here ever since.
What kind of farming did your father do? What did he?
Diversified farming.
Was it mostly fruits or
Not too much fruit. We had some fruit, but not too much. There was fruit to the North Farm, but we raised cattle and bulls and bucks and boars and heifers and diversified farming. We were chickens and geese and ducks, and we had a hen house and sold eggs to trade in Albin. But we was almost self-sufficient. When the Depression was on, we were neither cold nor hungry because we produced the things on the farm to eat.
Your chicken farm would be different today than
Oh,
it was
gracious!
then.
We'd raise 250 chickens every year, and put in about 100 pullets, 80, 90 pullets.
Wait, how did you get your pullets?
We bought the baby chicks when they were day-old chicks for 15 or 20 cents a piece. They varied in price, but we'd buy these day-old chicks and raise them in a brooder house. And we used to use the coal stove brooders, and we got to electric brooders, and we'd get 190 or 100 good pullets and put those in the hen house, and the two families would get their groceries out of that flock of hens in the winter. My father, mother, Navis and I when we were married. But the hens produced our groceries, and we produced the grain on the farm to feed the chickens. We had to get supplement at the mill, like bone meal, cod liver oil, and meat scrap and mashed for the chickens.
When you say mill, tell me about the mill.
To a grist mill, where they would grind your grain.
Where would that be?
Well, I used to go to Blodgett's in Albin, and then after Blodgett got out of the business, I went to GLF in Noseville, and then I went to GLF in Albin. But those farmers' mills are all gone. There's no more of them anymore. I guess they still grind at GLF in Noseville. You can take grist there and get it ground.
I've seen.
But years ago, everybody had a flock of hens.
Yes.
And now there's no farmers have hens anymore, little flock of hens. All the eggs that are raised in Orleans County, either with Bowman's or Roberts. Bowman's has got a big chicken ranch over here west of us on the other road. It's 40,000 layers in one building. And Justin Roberts, I guess, got 30, 40,000 layers in a building up in Shelby.
You said something about being married. When did you meet Avis, your wife?
Well,
Remember?
the first time I saw her, she was 3 years old, and I guess I was a lot older. I was a big boy. That's the first time I remember.
Is that when you made up your mind to marry her?
I don't know about that, but, well, I guess I better not go into that.
When were you married?
We were married the 17th of October in 1932. And we had an old Chevrolet automobile, a coupe, and we were married at 9 o'clock in the morning in Christ Church Rectory.
In Albion?
In Albion. And they didn't anybody know we were going to get married. We didn't make any hoop-de-doo about it. We didn't have a wedding or anything fancy. We went and bought our license at the town clerk's office, and in 10 minutes we were down at the rectory, and we were married, and we were out of town about 20 minutes later. And that morning, the announcements went into the post office. Just as soon as we were married and they were delivered that morning mail, people called my mother and thought it was a joke.
Your mother? You mean your folks didn't know?
Well, they knew it.
Oh.
And Avis folks, but then anybody else, people call them, got these notices, they called up, want to know if it was a joke. Marcus Phelps one of them. He called up because I'd been to too many weddings and I didn't think I wanted to have all that gang at my wedding.
Well.
And we went to New England. We had a ball.
Mm-hmm. You went to New England on your honeymoon?
That's right.
Uh-huh.
Went as far as east as Portland, Maine, out to Cape Cod, and we stopped and saw some friends in Poughkeepsie on our way home.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got back, we tried to find a place to live. So we lived in an apartment in Alvin one winter. That winter of 1932 and 33.
Mm-hmm.
And about 2 weeks after we got home, we decided that we'd build a house. And I had cut the lumber 8 years previous. It was in the Hemlock Woods, north and west of Cuckville. And
was this land that you owned?
no, my father made a deal with Lute Kenyon, who owned the woods. And we bought the trees on the stump. And we had to cut these trees and draw them from Cuckville to the Ridge Road, where there was a portable sawmill, where Fay Houndbeck's barn is. And they sawed the lumber there. It was 54 logs that we cut out of the woods, and it made over 7,000 feet of lumber. And it was piled up here west of the barn from 1925 until 1932. And there was
So it was well seasoned?
It was well seasoned. It was the nicest lot of hemlock lumber you ever saw. And that made the house. The house is 22 by 28. And it's a cozy, compact little Cape Cod cottage.
That's what you call the little house?
It's a little house.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, you were telling me that you didn't think it cost very much, really.
Well, it cost plenty then with the blood and sweat and tears.
Yes.
Because I dug the cellar with the help of one man in a week and a day. Dug it with a pick and shovel and a slip scraper and a team of horses.
A slip scraper?
A slip scraper. It's two horses draw this scraper that gouges in the dirt, pulls the dirt out after you loosen it up with a plow. And it took us a week and a day to dig the cellar. And then we built the forms and poured the cement. It cost $12.50 to pour the cement wall for that house. That's how hard times were. And there was 28 load of gravel in that basement. I brought it all from Pickett's gravel pit on a Model T truck and pitched every bit of it on with a shovel and shoveled it off by hand. So it was a lot of hard work. And we had 12 or 14 load of stone off the farm to go into the aggregate in the basement wall.
Aggregate?
Well, stone to help fill up the wall.
I see.
It was a lot of hard work. And carpenters were 50 cents an hour. And I had 3 carpenters till we got the frame up and the windows in and the roof on. And I had no funds. And I had paid them a little over $100, and I'd paid them in barter and trade, a lot of it. Paid for the sand with beef, and I paid for the carpenters and a side of beef. And then one of Avis's uncles, who was a pretty good carpenter, said he would help me finish it up on the inside, so he'll help me get the lath and plaster and the floors laid. But it's all homegrown. All the wood in there is all local grown wood, and I cut all of it.
Then did you move into the
We
house?
moved in there the 19th of April.
In what year?
1933. See, it was the day Paul Revere's ride. That's right. Paul Revere was 19th of April.
Oh, I see.
We moved in that 19th of April, and we had the house plastered just downstairs. Upstairs we didn't have the money to buy the lath and plaster upstairs, and all the time we was building that house, I never owed anybody over $100 at any one time. We got that much credit. We quit and paid them back as fast as we could. All the latches in there are old antique latches, all handmade latches by blacksmith. Be some nice ones there too.
Did you have them made, or were
No, they were old ones that I found here and there. Old Ben Howes, Dr. Howes, he gave me the latch on the kitchen door. It's a big one, probably a foot high, great big wrought iron latch.
Did you, when you were married, was Avis working?
She was working at the shirt factory in Medina when we were married.
New Orleans?
No. She worked first at the shirt factory in Medina. And then she got a job with a home bureau. They call it the home bureau then in Albin, Extension. And she worked for the Extension office in Albin when we was working. And she worked for 6 or 7 years after we were married. She did?
Okay.
Okay, she worked 10 years and 10 months.
All right. When was your son born?
He was born the 10th of October in 1944. See, we were married 12 years before Bill got here. But working on a farm and working in an office is a poor time to try to raise kids. And why bring kids into the world if you can't clothe them and feed them? I waited long enough. I was 47 years old when Bill was born.
Really? Yes. Well, now his real name is not really
His name is Cary Lattin.
Cary Lattin. And he's known as Bill.
That's right.
And he now is married to Heather
Boyd Sinclair.
Heather Boyd Sinclair?
No, Heather Sinclair Boyd.
I see. And they have two
Two children.
Two daughters,
Yeah.
yes. All right. Cary, you told a bit about the Latin Bridge in Homestead. Would you tell about that?
When the canal was went across the state of New York and they cut a farmer's land in two, he didn't want his farm divided. The farmer didn't. The state said, we will build you a bridge so you can get access to your land, which they did. There was a lot of little bridges, farm bridges all across the state. And they gradually, the farmer could buy land on the side where his home was, maybe sell the land to some other farmer, so they got rid of the bridge. And the bridges gradually got eliminated. And when the Latin farm over here was crossed by the canal, it was owned, before the Latins bought it, it was owned by the Baileys, and they had a farm bridge. And when Latins bought the territory, they still had the bridge to get across the canal. And when the Erie Barge Canal, taking over the Erie Canal, was in the process in 1910, 11, 12, and 13, making the canal deeper and wider, they was getting rid of all these farm bridges if they could possibly do it. And the state would buy the rights from the bridge and eliminate the bridge, and then you could go up and down the towpath or another road. West of Eagle Harbor, the Starkweathers had a similar situation, and they sold their rights back to the state, so they lost their bridge. And the state said they could go down the south bank of the canal to the Eagle Harbor Road or the Allen Bridge Road. Well, nobody took care of the road. So you're selling your birthright for a mess of pottage. When Jack Robinson owned the farm, and he had 35 or 40 horses there and wanted to get food to them in the spring of the year when the roads was bad, he appropriated some gravel off the town dump, and he got combed over pretty good for appropriating gravel. And of course he made it good, but he was in a jam. And the Latins would not relinquish their right to the Latins Bridge, and they still have it. And it's the only bridge in the state of New York on the Barge Canal system that serves just one farm. It used to serve the pumping station. The pumping station was the first waterworks in Albin. That took place in the 1880s. And when they came up there was a lot of springs there on the Latin farm, a lot of springs, all from there and running northwest right up through with the Lone Star Inn and off up south by Charlie Howard. It's all springy through there. They had these beautiful springs for the waterworks in Albin. And when Uncle Holmes sold their rights to these springs, he reserved the right that he should have all the domestic water forever from the Albin Waterworks. And so they had all the water they wanted there on that farm tapped right into their house and for cows and anything they want to use it for. And so when the new pumping station that went to the lake, and they abandoned this pumping station over here, the Latins still get free water from the village of Albin, because that's the way it was written up.
That's wonderful.
Pretty near 100 years ago. And when my great-grandfather lived on that farm, he was a very progressive farmer, and he was quite a wheel around Alvin. He had his fences arranged. There was 2 or 3 spring brooks on his farm. He had his fences arranged so he had running water in all of his fields for his cattle. He had a brook in each field. Maybe his lots weren't perfectly square or oblong or rectangle, but he had them arranged so that he had running water in each field. It was quite a thing.
How did he do that?
Well, where the brooks run around this, he made his fences go so they hit the brooks. I don't know how he did it. Maybe he had to divert some of the water a little bit to get them in these other fields. He also planted all the maple trees on East Avenue in Alvin, from the stoplight clear down to the high school.
What was his name?
Joseph A. Lattin.
Joseph A. Lattin.
He planted all the trees. Of course, many of them have been taken down. Old Harry Lattin told me that when I went to Cora Lattin's funeral. She died in 1932, and going down East Avenue, he said, you know, my grandfather planted all these trees. Harry was an old-timer then.
We've heard about the little house. When did you come into this house, this beautiful cobblestone house that you've called home for how long now?
Well, I've been here ever since I was 2 years old. My father died in 47 and my mother died in 50. And after she died, I turned the key and walked out. And it was vacant all that summer. She died in May.
This house?
This
was
house.
vacant?
She died in May. And some friends of ours are out here from Long Island, and he got to Avis, or she got to him before I got to see him when I was back on the farm that day that they arrived. And so they started putting the pressure on me to come over here and overhaul this house. He was a landscape architect. He was a connoisseur extraordinary of antiques.
This friend of yours
This
from Long
friend, his
Island?
name was Alan Burritt. He was raised here in a cobblestone house where Tom Hurd now lives. And he was one of my best friends. And he persuaded us to come over here and overhaul this cobblestone house. You see, it hadn't been wired, it hadn't been plumbed. There was a heating plant in here, a hot air furnace. So we had a lot to do. And it cost probably 3 times as much to overhaul this house in 1950. In 51, it did to build a little house in 1932 because things had gone up so.
It would cost a bit more today.
It would. It would. It's a nice little home, and I'm kind of pretty proud of it because Avis is a damn good housekeeper and a homemaker. And it's care that does things.
It's beautiful. It's just beautiful.
Housekeeping is a full-time job. You don't realize it as much as you do till you get older. I work down in the shop downstairs, and I've been working down there, geez, 2 or 3 days out of the week, you can hear the vacuum cleaner going up here. A lot of folks think if they clean it with a vacuum cleaner once a week, they're doing a pretty good job, or every 2 weeks. But you hear the vacuum cleaner going up here a lot of the time, and I didn't think it was that dirty.
When you say you're working downstairs in the shop, what do you mean? Tell me what.
Well, I got a little carpenter's bench down there, and a power saw, and a few hand tools, and I like to whittle and make things, like little tables like that, and chests of drawers that you see over there. It's fun to do it, and also make your fingers shorter. You can't pick up so many nails.
Well, let's see now. You had your 2 fingers cut shorter. What was that? The night of the blizzard or something?
The morning of the blizzard.
The morning of the blizzard. That's how you can remember.
Had a hell of a time getting to the hospital.
Well, carpentry has been one of your hobbies.
Yes, that's right. I can saw a board off square. And
yes, you said in carpentry, you said that you made your little house, and I don't know if you told me this in the right sequence or not, but when you made your little house that you sawed all of that wood?
I cut it in the woods.
Yeah.
I had a boy help me. His name was Dick Birdsman. And he and I cut those 54 logs in 2 days. Just sawed the logs out. We didn't clean up the tops, the brush, or anything else. We just sawed the logs out. And my father went down to the lake with a team of horses and a draw boy and drew the logs out of the woods to the side of the road where Dave Kuhn's house and barn stands on the Lake Shore Road. It took him almost a week to draw those logs out of the wood, a log or two at a time. And then in March, we drew those logs from Cuckville to the ridge where Fay Houndbeck's house and barn stands. There was a sawmill going to be in there that spring. And it took us a week and a day to draw those 54 logs. The roads were all dirt road at the time. There was a pretty good road from Cuckville to Waterport, but from Waterport to the ridge was a mud road, and it was quite hard pulling for the horses to draw those logs. We put usually three logs on a wagon. We went with two teams and two rigs. We leave here at 8 o'clock in the morning and get to Cuckville and get our logs loaded and have a lunch, some tea and a sandwich, and start for the Ridge Road about 1 o'clock, or a little after 1, and it'd be 4 or 5 o'clock before we got home at night. That was quite a jaunt to get all that lumber. There was 7,000 feet of lumber when we got it home. Then we had to draw it home from the sawmill, but that was in June. The roads wasn't so bad then.
Well, then coming on to your farm here, you've always been a farmer.
That's right.
Around here, and you said that you probably had diversified farming too, or not? What did you grow around here? Did you have animals or crops?
We had beef cattle, and we raised cabbage for a cash crop, and we raised tomatoes. When we started raising tomatoes here in 1924 or 5, we hadn't got into tomatoes much before 24 or 5. There was 4 or 5 canning factories in Orleans County. There was a canning factory in Medina. Heinz had a big plant up there. There was 3 canning factories in Albin, one in Holly, one at Morton, and one in Barry Center. And you could drive around the country here 25, 30 years ago, and in the summer there'd be more tomatoes than anything else. And now there isn't a canning factory within 80, 90 miles of here. The folks that raise farmers, they draw them clear over to west of Buffalo, at Irving or someplace west of Buffalo.
Now why is this?
I don't know. Whether the unions didn't do the canning industry any good now, but when the union went on strike at Birdseye Snyder in Albin in 1947 or 8, the canning factory told them, boys, you better not strike. But they was going to strike, and they did, and that was, I think, one of the reasons that Birdseye got out of Albin. I really do.
But wouldn't the unions have followed them?
Well, probably they would.
The states?
And they can raise. They got more sunlight in California, and the tomato business has gone that way.
Did you? You had to have help picking the tomatoes.
Yeah. I usually hired boys in the neighborhood that wanted to work, and we used to get women from Albin. The Polish women in Albin was good tomato pickers. Mary Judwick picked tomatoes here, and her mother, and his mother. They was darn nice.
Did you go in and get them?
I had to go and get them.
You had to get them and take them back.
Go get them. They'd work all day, and they worked for about $4 a day. And my mother fed them real well at noon always. And then after that generation died off, then we had to depend on other pickers. And well, there was a girl in Buffalo that worked in Trico, and she liked to get out on the farm in the fall, and she'd come down and pick tomatoes for 2 or 3 weeks in the fall.
After they picked tomatoes, did they put them in baskets?
They picked them in hampers. It held about 50 pounds.
And then how were they?
About 35 pounds a hamper held. Then you paid them so much a hamper. And when we first started picking them in hampers, they paid about 2.5 or 3 cents a hamper. And the price kept going up. It got so it was 25 or 30 cents a hamper to pick a hamper of tomatoes. And a good picker could pick 100 hampers in a day. And some would pick more than that. I heard one the other day, some fella's been picking apples for some of the pomos, pallets, and he was making $100 a day picking apples, and he broke his finger. And he went to the powers that be, and he wanted food stamps, making $100 a day. I was just wondering how times have changed to what they used to be.
Well, did you grow fruit ever on this farm?
We had some fruit, but I never enjoyed raising fruit. I don't know why. I like cattle, and we raised cash on crops as cabbage and tomatoes. Wheat, when wheat got $1 a bushel, we fed it up on the farm.
What do you mean you fed it up?
We fed it to our cattle instead of selling it for $1 a bushel.
Yeah.
It was pretty cheap for wheat. And one summer in 32 or 33, oats was 33 cents a bushel. That's pretty cheap.
How much is it? How much is it now?
I don't know. I don't know how much wheat.
Somewhere along the line, Cary, you said that the government, Eisenhower had a soil bank program. Would you tell me why you got into that, how you got into it?
Well, I heard about this soil bank, and Horace Bird was a conservation man here in the county at the time, and that was in 1950.
59?
58, I think 58 or 59. Our barn burned up in 1957.
Your barn burned?
Our barn burned on the 6th of September in 1957.
What happened to that?
Well, it was struck by lightning. I had put the last load of oats in the barn that morning. They'd been combined the day before, and we shoveled them off. Bill helped me shovel them into the granary. And it was the last grain we'd raised that summer. That was in September when the oats was combined. And I said, I'm going to the mill to get some chicken feed. Do you want to go with me? He says, no, I'm going back in the orchard playing the treehouse. He and Jack Miles had a treehouse back in the orchard. So I went to the mill. When I was down in the mill, we had an awful lightning storm. It was really sharp. And the girl in the mill there, she come around in the mill there where the men were and stood right up close to us. She was scared. And I said, no use of being afraid of it. You never know where it's going to hit. In fact, my father's been knocked down 3 times when he was a young man. And when I started for home, everybody was going by me. And when I got to Canal Bridge, I see why they was coming this way. The barn was all on fire. And it lightning struck the barn, and when it struck it, it was just like an atomic bomb. It just exploded. And the barn was on fire just almost instantaneous. Jack Miles, his brother, was looking out the window down there, and he saw it. And he says the fire was coming out of the barn windows just like that, you know, with all that dry hay and straw in there. And we lost all the grain and practically all the hay and straw we'd raised that summer. It was in the barn. All our grain was gone. Well, I had about 20 head of young cattle. There was no place to put them, and my other cattle, so my father-in-law had an empty barn, so I had took my cattle up there that winter. And
they were in another barn, is that right?
There wasn't any, you see, it was summer, there was no cattle in the barn. I lost 2 calves. There was 2 calves that burned up. But the cattle were all out in the field. And so I was getting tired. I was getting to be pretty near 60 years old, 58 I guess I was at the time. And I was commencing to get tired, and I heard of this soil bank, and I went to see about it. And they said that they would pay so much an acre.
Now that's a national program?
It's a national program. I went to see Horace Bird. He said they would pay so much an acre for so many acres, and if you put the whole thing in, they'll give you 10% more. So we came home and had a conference with Avis whether to get into 5 years or 10 years, and I said, let's try it for 5. And I saw Manly Morrison, who was a supervisor, and he'd gone into the soil bank. He was a good friend of mine. And he said, you're crazy if you don't get in for 10. He said, you will never want to go back and farm at your age. And Bill says, I don't want any part of farming. He was then about 12 years old. And so we signed up for 10 years, and they paid, well, $18 or $19 an acre for the land. That was arable land. They didn't pay anything for the orchard or the woods, but all the other land where you could crop, they paid so much an acre.
And they paid you not to grow crops?
They paid us not to grow crops, and we had to mow it.
You had to mow
We had to mow it so it didn't get foul.
So it didn't get what?
Foul. So it didn't grow up to brush.
I see.
Because if you stop mowing the land or stop working it, nature takes over pretty fast. Here's this little acre out here. There's trees out there, that big ground that hasn't been mowed. Walnuts grew up there, and I thought, well, that's nice to have walnut trees, let them grow, but I should have cut them down. But nature takes over pretty fast. It goes back to jungle.
Well, then did they have people come around and check
They
and
come
see
and
how
check.
you're-
They come and checked it over to see if he was doing according to your part of the agreement. You had to mow it. In the first 2 years, you hadn't mow it all. Then they decided to mow half of it in strips. Mow a strip 8 rod long and then skip a strip. And then they got to mowing it on thirds. Well, if you didn't mark where you had mowed the year before, you'd get fouled up. So some of ours got 2 or 3 years, it kind of got stuffed. So I was cutting elm trees off as big as my thumb, about all the lawn the mowing machine would take, you know, because it's hard to do it. And so then they went out of that soil bank.
Were there quite a few farmers around here?
There was quite a few went into it.
Is that right?
And when I went into the soil bank, I put the whole farm in, so we sold all of our cattle, sold all our livestock. We sold our sheep, and we sold,
you had sheep too.
sold our horses, and we sold all our cattle. And took down all the fences, so it's 2 great big fields. So the north farm and this farm is one great big, each one's a big field. And I rented it to one of the neighbors for a couple of years, and he didn't want it anymore, so for the last 4 years, I rented it to the Bowman Farms, and they're good farmers.
But you still own the land?
We own the land.
I see. But is that soil bank, I'm showing my ignorance, is that soil bank phased out completely now?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The government can control, I guess, we get information from a place up here, this SAE or whatever it's called. Occasionally you can raise so much wheat or corn or what you have. But Bowman's, they rent it and they run the works, and they pay me in the fall of the year, and that's the way I like it. They're good farmers, and they plow that land that I've never seen, because they plow so much deeper with these big tractors. They plow 8 or 10 furrows, you know, across the field. And
well, when you started farming, you probably used animal power.
we had two horses on a plow. Sometimes we put 3 horses on a plow if it was hard plowing.
Yes, and you walked behind the plow?
Walk behind the plow.
And did you go into mechanized farming too, or not?
The first tractor I got was a second-hand Fordson tractor.
Ford?
Fordson, it was called, a
Fordson.
Fordson. And I bought a second-hand tractor and a disc and a drag for $300. And I used that 2 or 3, let's see, probably 3, 4 years or 4, but the Fordson tractor wasn't too much of a power plant. And we lost a couple of horses, so we had to have a team of horses anyhow, so we got my father and I got another big team of horses, and we used them and used horses all we could to save burning up gasoline or kerosene. And I didn't get my first international rubber tire tractor until 1944. I bought a Farm All A.
A farm what?
A Farm All was McCormick Deering International. And it was a little tractor. It would draw 1 plow and an 8-foot disc and an 8-foot color packer. Not all at once, but at separate times. And that was an awful lot of work in that tractor. And it cost about $800 when I got it in '44, and I used it 12 years, and I traded it in for more than I paid for it. That's how it appreciated. And I got a bigger one. But then I didn't farm it only 2 more years after I got the bigger tractor and went into the soil bank. And I was always glad I did, because I was getting tired, and Bill wasn't interested in farming. And the way the help is, what the heck would you do? The bookkeeping and the restrictions that you got to go through now, I should think the first thing a farmer wants to do to get into a farming business is to get a good bookkeeper, the first thing. And how is a young guy going to get in farming today? You got $100,000 worth of equipment before you got any land. And the prices of this land business, Orleans County's always been low around the state on other prices of land. Down in Yates County, land down there, $1,200–1,400 an acre, and go out west, what is it, $2,000–3,000 an acre for some of the land in Kansas? It hasn't been that high around here. And I hate to see it go up, because it goes up, you're going to pay more taxes.
Well, you're either big today on the farm or not.
You what?
You're either
Yeah,
a
you
big
got-
farmer
yeah.
or you
Well,
can't get in.
I don't know. They say I was always a small farmer. They say, oh, why don't you raise 25 or 30 acres of tomatoes and get the blacks to pick them and do all this. We kept within our bounds, and Avis picked tomatoes. And we operated small. And I'm still living here, and a lot of these other guys aren't. I know when I started building the little house, and I talked to my mother about building. I don't know whether I ought to build it any bigger or not. She said, you know, I'd rather be living on the inside of a little house than on the outside of a big house.
Huh.
And I sometimes wish we had built that little house over there 2 feet farther, 2 feet wider and 2 feet longer, because that 2 feet would have made quite a little bit of difference. But on the other hand, if I'd have gone 2 feet longer, I'd had more windows in the front, or it'd look cockeyed. And the same way the other way. So it's a cozy, snug little house, and I think Avis would like to go back there today. It was a
Cary, I'd like you to tell us, you became county historian in February of '58.
58.
Would you tell us just a little bit about that, how you got into that, and just a little bit about your experiences with
Well, Joe Achilles died in December of '57, and Milton Cass and Scott Clark were two good friends of mine, and they got to talking about Joe dying, historian, and Milton and Scotty got to talking, and they said, "Well, geez, Cary's a natural for that. Let's see what we can do." So when I come out of church one day, there was this note on my steering wheel: "Come down to the house. I want to see you." So I went down, and Scotty says, "You know, Joe's died," and he said, "Why don't you get that job?" Well, I said, "I haven't got a Chinaman's chance to get it." Well, he says, "Let's try." He says, "We'll talk to the supervisors." And so they started to prod me, and so I went to see Les Canham, who had just been elected supervisor, and also the chairman of the board, who was a fellow from Kendall, and a couple of other friends on the board. So I started pulling all the wires I could pull, and then they advertised, and they had interviews, which they haven't done on this new job that I read about in the paper. So they had interviews.
What new job is that?
Well, I can't tell you now, but I'll tell you. So there was noise around that Joe Achilles' job was going to be filled. And there was about 10 that applied for the job. And I was shaking in my boots. And I went to see the supervisors, and they talked all right. But there was, Canham was in my corner, and so was Mike Paduchek, and I know I went to see Bill Knights, and I never talked with him before. And he said, "I got nothing against you, but I'm not going to promise I'm going to vote for you." He says, "Maybe next week some of my relatives want to get the job." He says, "I'd be in a bad shape." So, "Well, if I promise you," I said, I kind of admired him for saying it that way. See, didn't make no commitments. So when they voted to who they was going to hire, we'd had to go and had an interview. And everybody was in there, had a chance to interview. There was 10 of us that was trying to get the job. And I got it by a vote of 6-4. So then they made it unanimous. That was the agreement that they was going to do. And then
Where was your office, Cary?
down where the girls are, Helen and Helen, only it's on the north part of that office.
Down in the courthouse
Down
basement?
the election office. The north, it was an alley, went right through out
Yes.
to us. There was a blister on the east side of the courthouse there. Side steps, you come down in there,
Yes,
a hatchway.
yes,
And we had the north room was about as big as this room here. And then back of it was a little cupboard, about that wide, was stashed right full of everything.
Well, you held that job for how many years?
I resigned the 31st of December in '75, And I think I said I would stay on until they got somebody else, and I stayed there till the 1st of April was when Mac took over.
Yes.
But when I was appointed historian, there was a person come down in there one day, flounced around, and said, I don't know how you got this job of county historian. There's others that are a lot better qualified than you are to have it. I didn't get mad or say any four-letter words, but I was damn mad when I come home. Got home, maybe I wasn't here. I'd taken her somewhere, and I forgot where the hell I'd left her. I was goddamn mad. But she always laughed about that.
Well, you did a wonderful job as county historian, and you've become renowned for being a wonderful speaker.
No.
Oh yes, yes you are.
Well,
you can tell the most wonderful stories with a twinkle in your eyes and lots of flavorful spices.
It was quite a rewarding experience because I met a lot of fine people all the way from Rouse's Point to Montauk Point, from the Niagara frontier to the southern tier. And I have said many times that I would rather have 1,000,000 friends than I would $1,000,000. And some folk will say, I'll take the $1 million, but if you look at it at a mercenary standpoint, each one's worth a $2 touch.
Cary, well, before we leave the courthouse, Arden said that I should be sure to ask you to say something about that beautiful weather vane, the fleur-de-lis that you had, that you were really the force behind having that made and put up there. Would you tell about that?
When they put lightning rods on the courthouse, you see, originally there was a weather vane on the courthouse, a big arrow. And part of it's up in the courthouse dome. It was up there during the centennial. It was pretty well broken apart. Well, anyhow, when they put the lightning rods on the courthouse, Wally Ford would come in there one day, and he said, you know, they're putting lightning rods on the courthouse next week. He says, he always talked about putting a weather vane up. He says, let's put it up. One day I says, Wally, you can't put a weather vane up in a minute. It takes time. What are we going to do? What design are we going to have? How are we going to make it out of? Where are you going to get it made? And so it was dropped in a month or two or after that. Well, I said, well, I've been working on that weather vane. Well, he says, who's going to look up there and see it? He says, I don't think it. I says, it's a beautiful thing on a weather vane on a building. It's all over the eastern part of the United States, and all nice old buildings. He says, I don't think so. He was cool, so I didn't say anything about it. And after Clapper got here to Alvin,
Jerry Clapper.
He was in there one day, and I said, geez, I'd like to see a weather vane go up on the courthouse sometime. And I think I got some of my friends that we could buy the metal and make it and put it up. So it's no cost to the county. We will make it. The only thing they got to do is install it on their building. So Clapper, he went right up to the Board of Supervisors and he says, Lattin wants a weather vane down there, and let's get this thing going. And geez, they passed this weather vane resolution. It's in the supervisor procedure. You'll see it in there. That I be allowed to build a suitable and appropriate weather vane for the county, no expense to the county except to install it.
And they hadn't even seen the design of it?
We didn't have any design.
I see.
Well, Orleans is fleur-de-lis. When they built the jail, they had a design over there, and George Batchelor was chairman. He come down, he said, what kind of a design are we going to have on this plaque on the jail? I said, by all means, get a weather vane, fleur-de-lis, Orleans. And he went along, and you notice the fleur-de-lis on the east side of the jail where the entrance is there?
Is that right?
Yeah, there's a fleur-de-lis on there, and a sheaf of wheat, and other things, a plow maybe, and this design for a county seal. I said, get a weather vane. We got to have a weather vane. So they gave me permission to build a weather vane. That was 10 years ago. And I started talking about this, what kind of metal, and how you're going to get it anodized or gold leaf or what, and did a lot of thinking. I talked to some of these engineers, what kind of a thrust bearing you're going to have, and what kind of a race bearing you're going to have, or up on the top and all these things.
Kind of a race bearing?
A bearing up at the top where it swings around here,
Oh,
it goes
yes.
down here, so it's the thrust bearing, all that weight goes on one ball bearing.
Oh, yes.
And so I talked to Bing about it. Bing he was for it.
Now who's Bing?
Bingaman, Bing and Dave, the two boys, the janitors, Bingaman.
Okay.
And he was all for it. And about 3, 4 years ago, he says, you know, they're going to start doing some work on the dome. He says, we better start thinking about it. So we went to Rochester one day and bought the metal. And it was there in Bing's office for quite a while, and 2 years ago he said, this fall we're going to be overhauling the top there. He says, we better have it made. So we got right at it. And Heather designed the fleur-de-lis.
Your daughter-in-law, Heather.
That's right. She designed it, and Bing cut it out with a saber saw. And it's all bolted together with stainless steel bolts. And we took it to Buffalo and had it gold anodized. That made it quite bright gold. And when we brought it home, and I wasn't too happy with it. It wasn't too shiny. And Johnson was needling me a little bit. And he says, why the hell don't you get gold leaf on it? He says, you got enough money to buy gold leaf for it. And I said, well, I don't know about that. So I asked Clapper, and Clapper and I bought the metal and the gold leaf for the weather vane. We had other help. Don Ross furnished the pipe. Bob Brown furnished the bearings. And there was, I guess that's only ones that put in money. And it cost right around $300. The gold leaf cost about $116 on it. And Avis and I put it on the dining room table. And it looks pretty good.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. Just beautiful.
But it was 10 years in the making before we got it up there.
So you really started that in 1968, 67.
Is that when it's in the supervised proceedings?
I don't know,
can't tell.
but 10 years ago,
Yeah,
I mean, this
about-
is 78,
just about.
so it would be about
It's
there.
about 10 years ago I started it.
Well, it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful.
And I hear they're going to light it up at night.
Is that right? Yes,
They're
that would be
getting
nice.
they're getting spotlights on there. But
Yeah.
if that shines on at night, it'll look nice up there.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Well, I'll tell you another one about the courthouse.
Yeah.
Maybe I have. My father was on jury. 60 years ago, in the fall of the year, and it come on a Saturday night to adjourn court. And the judge whammed his gavel down. He says, court adjourned till tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. My dad was in the jury box. He went right over to the judge, and he says, Judge, Your Honor, he says, I got to be excused tomorrow morning. He says, what do you mean be excused? He says, what are you going to do, pull beans or cut corn? Yeah. The old man says, no, he says, I'm not going to pull beans or cut corn, but it's the first day of pheasant season. And Sanford Church, who was an attorney right there in the group, he says, and I have always gone pheasant hunting the first morning of pheasant hunting, and we're not going to be put off. He says, the judge whammed his gavel down, 1, 2, 3. He says, court's adjourned till Monday morning. I'm going with you. That's a fact. See, telling the truth. Tell the truth.
Okay, Cary, you tell the truth. Now, you were telling me before the tape recording got going something about your mother pulling mustard.
Oh, you asked me when I was born. It was 11th of June, and she was pulling mustard that morning out west of the house there, and she decided she better come to the house because she's going to have a baby. And she got up to the rail fence, could hardly get over the fence. She was so damn big. And I weighed 12 pounds.
You weighed 12
Yeah.
pounds?
Yeah. Big babies was a good thing to have that day, and
Yes.
pretty near done the old lady in. She didn't have any more.
My goodness. Well, you're not big. You've
No,
never been
no.
never been large, really, have you?
No, her family was, most of them were small bones, the Walkers.
Well, we have just a few more minutes here. You were instrumental in organizing the Cobblestone Society, and you've been very active in the Masons. You've been very active in child welfare.
Well, not too active in child welfare. I think I was president or vice president for 5 or 6 or 7 years, and I used to go to the meetings. It was a good thing, and you see, I've been a member of the Bogue Board for probably 25 or 30 years. I was associate director, and for several years. Then when Francis Sturgis, or Judge Sturgis, went off, they put me in to take his place. And the trustees manage this estate of Virgil Bogue. And this this interest money, see, we have to give, I can't tell what the percent of it is, but we have to give this money away to worthy children. Pearl Eddy in Medina, she does the groundwork, and Olga Hinckley used to do groundwork for us. That's these school counselors, or
Oh, yes.
what they call them, school counselors,
Yes.
that recommend these children, and they get about $300. It's a gift, outright gift. And you know, there's very few of them write back and say, I'm going back to school, thank you very much for the donation. Albert Hubbard wrote a dictionary a long time ago. My mother had one of them, and I don't know where the deuce it went to, but I wished I had it. But his definition for gratitude is that sense of appreciation of a favor about to be received. You know how true that is. You think about
Well, sometimes it takes years before you can realize,
the gratitude.
yes.
But there's very few of these youngsters. When you sat on the board, the other day they had the list of who they are. There's 4 or 5 from Kendall, and 4 or 5 from Holland, Albin, and Medina, and Lindenville. And no children on that I know, but they get $300 along in September, or 150 in September, and then another 150 in February. Well, $300 will buy you food for quite a few days, or a few books, or wash a few clothes. It'd help, I would think, where you're scrimped for money.
Besides being active in the child welfare and the Bogue Home for Dependent Children that covers Orleans County, you've been very active in the Masons.
Well, I was master in 1938. I was joined the Masons in 1924. I've been a Mason for 54 years, and I was district deputy in 1958 and 59. And it was quite an experience. And a lot of people got religious or bias against the fraternal organizations, but the Masons do an awful lot of good in the state of New York. They have this Masonic home at Utica, and they're trying to raise this next 2 years, I think $7 million to expand their home and to bring it up to more modern. The state clamps down on all these nursing homes, you know, to come up to the state standards, and we're going to do it, and we do a lot of good. The people down there are very happy in this Masonic home. I went down there when I got my warrant in 1958, and they had a concert in the gymnasium there. And at the time, there was only about 12 or 14 youngsters at this Masonic home. Some of these kids was in college.
A Masonic home is for young people?
Young people and old people, but they're mostly old people now, but they still take youngsters there, I think, orphans.
Oh.
And it was a nice concert. 2 of these kids had come back for this concert from college. There was in Syracuse or somewhere else, but they come back to be in this concert because they could play. And there was a girl in this concert that sang, and her name was Maureen or Josephine O'Hara. And that's a long ways from any Masonic name. That's pretty near Irish, O'Hara. Red-headed, Irish gal. And everybody was, after the concert was over, everybody was around there, and there was Raymond G. Ellis, who was a past Grand Master. He was there in the group, and it was all milling around there. And this girl come running out to him and threw her arms around him just like father and daughter. Well, you know, here was an orphan running up to the Grand Master like your own kids. Well, you know, that kind of went on me, and I've never forgotten it. And they do an awful lot of good. And the damn Masons, they keep all their light under a bushel basket. And all these things that they find out about geriatrics and gerontology and urology and all this stuff, it's all funneled to Cornell and Syracuse and New York University. These other laboratories that are doing this thing, all this stuff is they give it to them, and they're doing a great job doing it.
You mean the Masons?
The Masons are doing it.
Are contributing money towards this, you mean, or what?
They're contributing money to this this experimental laboratory that they got in Utica.
I didn't know that.
In Utica in June 1958. H. Lloyd Jones, who was then the Grand Master of the state of New York, dedicated this laboratory. And Governor Averill Harriman was there and took part in this ceremony. And also Arthur Levitt, who was state controller. It was the first time that I had the chance to meet a governor and the controller of the state first-handed. I had a nice talk with Governor Averill Harriman, and he wanted to be remembered to several of his Democrat friends in Albin, especially Bernard Ryan, who was then Chief Justice of the Court of Claims. when the Grand Master was here in May 1978 and laid the cornerstone under the print shop in the cobblestone complex, I made a gavel for William R. Punt that he used in the ceremony that day. And I had a nice letter later thanking me for that gavel, because my father planted the tree that gavel was made out of 92 years ago.
What kind of wood was that?
Black walnut.
Was that from your own property?
That was from my own property. Dad planted that tree right north of the stone house in 1886. And I cut the tree, had the tree cut down because we was afraid it was going to blow down, about 1968 or 9.
You make quite a few wooden things.
I make wooden things. I make tables and cutting boards and anything out of nice wood.
Especially walnut?
Walnut or cherry.
For the Orleans County Historical Association, July 24th, 1979, Helen McAllister of Medina, New York, is interviewing Mr. Cary Lattin. Mr. Lattin lives in a beautiful cobblestone house on the Gaines Basin Road near Albion, New York. He lives with his wife, Avis. This tape concerns the formation of the Cobblestone Society.
Well, I'll try and tell a little bit about the history of the Cobblestone Society, why it was formed, and how it was formed. During the year 1959, when Gaines had their sesquicentennial celebration at Gaines, it was going to be a one-day celebration, a one-day fair. And it took about 2 months to get ready for this sesquicentennial celebration. We wanted to visit the points of interest around the town, and we wanted to visit the Cobblestone Church at Childs. And we went to the Universalist Board in Albion to ask them if they would open the church for one day so we could see the interior of this beautiful old cobblestone church. 2 or 3 of us went down to the church, and the board came down, and we went through the building, and the plaster was bad in the ceiling, and it was kind of rough shaped. There was many windows that were broken, and the Universalist Board decided that it would be risky to have a bunch of children running around in the church. They might jar some plaster and break somebody's glasses, so we didn't have the church to visit. During the centennial and after the centennial, people commenced to ask, what's going to happen to the old church? When you tell an American, a damn Yankee, that he can't have something, hell is out for dinner time, then they want it. They learned that in Prohibition. When they told the American people they couldn't have booze, they got booze, one way or another. So people in the neighborhood were concerned, people in the district were concerned, in town, and people out in the provinces were concerned. What's going to happen to this old, beautiful church? And people would say what's going to happen to it. We had no organization formed that could maintain the building, or had no society formed that could operate a thing like it is today. During the winter of 1960 and 61, during the winter of 1959 and 60, Bob Frash taught school in Holly, history and English, and he formed a Yorker Club in the Holly High School. And one of their projects was to find the cobblestone houses in the town of Murray and get all the information on these 14 cobblestone houses in Murray. There wasn't too much information available. And he came into the office when I was historian and asked me what I knew about a cobblestone house. Well, I says I've lived in one about 60 years, and by way of talking about cobblestone buildings, there's a beautiful building at Childs, a church. And he says, let's go and see it. So we proceeded to go down to Childs, stopping in at Homer Brown's house to get the key to the church. And when he saw the interior of this old cobblestone church, he really flipped. He says, this building should be saved. I said, yes, I know it should be saved, but how are you going to save it? We have no organization whatsoever to do this. We have no money, there's no organization, and how are you going to form an organization as quick as that? Well, people commenced to get concerned. The history of the historian in the town of Alvin, Catherine Billings, whose ancestors had been attendants of this church. The historian in the town of Gaines, Howard Pratt, was interested. And that's the way it hung fire. The next fall, in 1960, Charlie Thompson called me one morning about 6 o'clock and said, say, he says, they're going to sell the Cobblestone Schoolhouse. We better do something about it. I like that, we better do something about it. So I went down to see Charlie, and he said all the district schools had been centralized in the 5 schools in Orleans County: Kendall, Holly, Albin, Medina, and Lindenville. And he says, you know, they're going to sell this building next week, Tuesday, at Albin Central School. They're going to dispose of it. Well, I said, Charlie, will you go up to the meeting? You can vote. He says, yeah. Will you go up to the meeting and vote against selling it to hold this on the table for 6 months until we can do something? He says, sure. Charlie stuttered a little bit. So I took it upon myself to go and see about 12 or 14 people in that immediate district, Gaines 5, to see if they would go to the Albin Central School at this meeting and see if we couldn't save this, stall this off for 4 or 5 or 6 months until we could get an organization. And Frash and I went to the meeting, and we asked if we could be heard. And we both talked about holding this up until an organization could be formed. Our main purpose was to save the church. This was the mate building, the Cobblestone School and the Cobblestone Church. And we gave them our pitch, and they listened. Walter Balcom was there. He had gone to school at this Cobblestone School. He had attended the Cobblestone Church when they had their special meetings there during the summer, twice each summer. And he had a very fine vocabulary of 4-letter words. And he got up and he says, I make a blankety-blank motion that this blankety-blank sale of the schoolhouse be left on the table for 6 months, and if you blankety-blank guys can't get organized in that length of time, you don't deserve the damn school. And they voted unanimously to hold us up for 6 months. They tossed us the torch, and then we had to do something. So we got an ad hoc committee, so to speak. We had no money, we had no funds, we had nothing. And on this, we wrote a letter, Bob Frash, it was in his writing, and we got Catherine Billings, who was Albin Town historian, and Howard Pratt, who was Gaines Town historian, and Morris Wilson, who lived next door to the church, and 1 or 2 others, and Bob Frash and myself. We signed this letter. And we sent this letter out to 100 people. We went through the telephone directory and looked in there and saw names of people who we thought would be interested in saving their heritage. Well, the meeting was called at 3 o'clock on a rainy, cold Sunday afternoon in October.
This would be October 1960?
1960. And you know, there was 65 people showed up at that meeting. And we had a slate of officers drawn up. We'd asked all these people if they would take, either be a director or an officer. And we told them what we wanted to do at this meeting. And there was about 60 people signed up to be members. And some of them paid a $2 dues right then. So we had the thing started, so to speak, and we agreed to meet at the Village Inn in about 2 weeks and get an organization meeting. And we had a dinner meeting over at the Village Inn, and we had the West Room pretty well filled up. There's probably 80, 90, or 100 people there who was interested in saving this building. And Carl Schmidt was there. He was also at the first meeting. He had written a book about cobblestone buildings in 1944. And those little books that he wrote in 44 are collector's items today. So we had a slate of officers drawn up. We had a cross-section of our people. We had an attorney, we had 2 architects, we had school teachers, we had farmers, and we had businessmen on this thing. We had a cross-grain of what was going on. and with the help of the attorney and Bob Frash, they came up with a set of bylaws and a constitution. And we asked for a charter from the New York State Department of Education. And we were wise. That was the attorney's advice. Get this charter from the State Department of Education if you possibly can. So we had this application for a charter, and it was signed by, I think, the directors and officers. And by the end of the 6 months, we had a temporary charter. So when the schoolhouse came up for sale the next April, that was in 1961, we had the $129 in our fat little hands to pay for the schoolhouse. That's what we had to pay for deeds and search and the necessary proper papers that has to be signed and transferring property. So we owned a building. Okay. We were in business. Carl Schmidt came up with the idea that we could have a tour that spring in 1961. And we held a cobblestone tour to make money. And it was held right around this vicinity. That fall, we had an auction in the schoolhouse to make some more money. But our main concern was to save the church. We had made some overtures to the Universalist Board in Albin, and they were in our corner, so to speak. And we kept trying. John Brush, who was a director on our society, was in the hierarchy of the Universalist State Convention, and his influence didn't hurt a bit. He was a trustee of St. Lawrence University, and he's endowed St. Lawrence University very well. And it took about 2 or 3 years before the final papers came through. And after the papers were signed by the Universalist State Convention, and the Universalists over here had relinquished what rights they had in the building, it seems though they sat for months on Judge Survey's office, in his office. And I saw him one day in the courthouse hall, and I said, you know, Judge, why can't you hurry that up a little bit? We want to get title of that building, and we want to do things. And he says, you know, Cary, don't try to coerce a Supreme Court judge. I wouldn't want to put you in jail.
He said, don't try what?
Coerce, see, influence a judge. You know, you're not supposed to do that.
Oh, I see, coerce.
So I kept still. So in about 3 years, we got clear title to the Cobblestone Church.
Now, you mean the Cobblestone Church in Albion?
The Cobblestone Church they were talking about. The Cobblestone Church at Childs.
At Childs,
At Childs.
yes, I see.
And so we were in business real good. We, the Cobblestone Society, put a roof on that building that cost $2,200 before we owned it. That's how much we thought of the building. So we had 2 buildings. Well, our angel, John Brush, is a good friend of mine. I've known him as long as I've known anybody around Albin High School. And he was a fairly wealthy man. And I said, you know, one day, John, we should restore the tower. There was a tower on that church when it was first built. And the tower was removed in 1918 because it was getting deteriorated. Those timbers were rotted, so they decided, the Universalist Society, to take the tower off. And he said, I think so too. And he said, I will pay for it. So John and I went to see Hobart Snell, who was the only contractor close by. And John and Hobart made a deal, and the tower was restored. I can't tell you what year it was, perhaps in 63 or 4. And he paid for it himself. And one day when he was up there, the terrace in front of the church was in bad shape. When we bought the church, it was all covered over by wood vine. Nobody knew there was a terrace there. They just thought there was some steps going up there. So one day when there was some of the directors down there decided to clean up some of this wood vine, they discovered there was a terrace. And it looked pretty crummy. And one day John says, I think we better do some repair on the front of the church. I will repair the terrace and furnish some landscaping. So we went to see Pat DeLaura, who was the last of the Orleans County quarrymen. Is the finest gentleman that I ever hoped to know.
He had worked in the stone quarries?
Pat DeLaura was Mr. Stone Quarry, Mr. Medina Sandstone.
Right.
And he was 80 years old at the time, and he said he would take upon the job of restoring the terrace. And he still had some influence at the quarries in Hubbardton, and went down there with some of his trucks and got a couple of load of stone to relay this terrace. And he, with his stone cutter helper, Sandy Malone, and Pat DeLaura relayed the stone. Frankie Szerzinski let us have 4 or 5 of his colored boys over there to do the gut work. They had to dig out the trench and do some of the heavy lifting for Pat. It was Pat and Sandy Malone that laid the terrace. And that was laid in 1966. And it looked pretty nice. And these shrubs that we planted came from a nursery up at Newfane. And that first summer they were planted there, they guaranteed these shrubs would live. And I said, that's awful nice, to guarantee these shrubs. He says, however, you got to water them this summer. And I watered them 27 times that summer. And I got water for free out of Hank Radzinski's spigot. You know, neighbors are better than money sometimes. When Hank Radzinski was going to get his license for a liquor store right next to the church, he was having problems. And the secretary of the Orleans County Liquor Authority came to me and he said, Cary, how many times are you going to have service in your church? It wasn't my church, and I wasn't having the service, but that's what he said. I said, all right, we don't know whether we'd have any service. You know, he said, Hank is going to have problems getting a liquor store next to a church. And I said, if you talk to any cobblestoner, and they try to do any one thing to stop his getting the liquor store, clobber him. And I told Howard Pratt, and I told a couple others, I says, if they want to have a liquor store there, he's going to get it in spite of hell. And let's have his goodwill. So we had his goodwill. When we wanted water, we had thousands and thousands of gallons of water. And I talked to Hank about it. He says, I know it. He says, I appreciate what you guys didn't do. So we're in business. About that time, or a little later, Nellie Vagg, who lived kitty corner across the street, had a blacksmith shop. That was her husband's blacksmith shop. The original shop was a brick shop, was built in the 1830s, and that burned up in the fall of 1921. And the farmers needed a blacksmith in 1921 to repair their tools and shoe their horses and do the necessary things around the farm that had to be done. So the farmers pitched in, helped Joe build the blacksmith shop, and he was off and running. And he operated that shop until in the 50s. Joe Vagg and Nellie Vagg were solid citizens. Nellie Vagg worked in the shop with Joe. She would run the bellows and help build a fire when they was set in wagon tires. And she was the only woman that I ever knew that always wore black stockings, even when she got to be an old lady and was through with the blacksmith shop. She always wore black stockings because black stockings in the blacksmith shop was more appropriate than colored stockings. They were solid citizens, and I mean solid citizens. He earned all his money with an anvil and a hammer. And he sent 2 kids to college. The girl went to Elmira and graduated there. The boy went to University of Rochester, graduated there, and he got to be night editor of the Democrat and Chronicle. So they didn't do too bad. Nellie Vagg decided to give the blacksmith shop to the Cobblestone Society. It was to be ours at the end of 5 years or at her death, whichever came last. And she lived longer than 5 years, so after she died, we got clear title to the blacksmith shop. And we put a roof on the blacksmith shop about the time we acquired it. It might have been a little bit before, but about that time. So now we had 3 buildings. We had the church and school and the blacksmith shop.